Okay, good evening. Welcome to Parsha Shiur. So Parsha's told us some very interesting ideas. The Parsha begins, of course, with Yitzchak and Rivka davening for children. The Pasuk says, "Ve'ele told us Yitzchak ben Avram, Avram heard this Yitzchak, Yitzchak ben Aboim shana bekachta es Rivka," that he was 40 years old when he got married. Vayeta Yitzchak Hashem l'neicha chishta ki akarahi. And Yitzchak is opposite his wife, and he's davening, Vayeta, he's entreating Hashem, ki akarahi, because she is barren. Now, there's a very interesting comment of the Yalkut Yosef. He quotes the Chasam Sofer, which I just want to start off with this evening. If you take a look at the second box, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. The Rabbi Yosef quotes the Chasam Sofer regarding this pasuk, and we'll see how. So he starts off and is saying a few halachas generally about davening for another person. So Rabbi says the following: HaMispalel ala choyle, someone who davens for a choyle, ein tzarich lahaskes shemoi. Strictly speaking, you do not need to say the name of the choyle. What's the proof? Shari Moshe Rabbeinu mispalel al Miriam, v'omar kel nor afon Allah. And he doesn't say Miriam bas Yocheved. He just says kel nor afon Allah. He doesn't say the name. V'lo hiskes es shma klal. Now, and when is that true that you don't have to mention the name of the choyle? When you're in the presence of the choyle. But if you're davening for the choyle not in his or her presence, then you mention the name of the choyle with the mother's name, Ploni ben Plonis, as we're familiar with. What if you don't know the mother's name? So Yaski also b'shem aviv, Ploni ben Ploni. You mention the father's name. Once heard the reason why you mention the mother's name is because the mother is more rachamim than din. It comes from the rechem, the child, and therefore we draw on the rachamim that is inherent more in the mother. But what if you don't know the mother's name or the father's name? Ploni ben Chava. Yeah, you say so and so ben Chava, because ultimately everyone eventually goes back to Chava. Now, v'hamispalel ha'choyle yochel l'shanas miloshna pasuk v'loima betfila kel na rafon loy. If it's a male choyle, a male sick person, you can change from kel na rafon lo to loy. Now that again, if you're in the presence of the person, you can do that. Now, he then quotes at the bottom, and this is in the footnote, which is the next paragraph. U'b'sefer zichron l'Moshe al Agon ha'chasam sofer kosav b'pirush vayetza Yitzchak Hashem l'neicha chishtoi. Interestingly, he quotes our pasuk that Yitzchak Avinu davened l'noichach ishtei. Why? Ki sheloi b'foneo yitzarich lahaskish shma v'shem avia. If he's davening for Rivka to have children, then if she was not in the room, he would have to say Rivka and her parents' name, her mother's name or her father's name. V'hari Besuel Rosh Haya. And to quote the father's name, Besuel, he didn't want to do that because Besuel was a Rasha. On the contrary, it would be a kitrug, it would sort of do more damage because that would be a kitrug against Rivka. He therefore davened specifically in front of her, because thereby he didn't have to mention a name at all. Maybe it's the father's name which actually is causing the illness or the difficulties, the pain that the person is encountering. And that's why you change the name. Okay, but either way, it's a very interesting insight, quoting the Chasam Sofer, why Vayeta Yitzchak Hashem l'noichach ishtei, specifically in front of his wife, because technically speaking, you have to name the parents of the person, and he didn't want to mention Besuel. Besuel's a Rasha, so therefore he specifically did it in front of her, and therefore he could just daven without mentioning the name. Okay, then we come across something very interesting. If you look at the next box, Vayimlu yomeh loledes, that Rivka becomes pregnant, and her days she's ready to give birth. V'hinei toimim bevitna, and she's expecting twins. The first child is Esav, and his hand is holding on to the heel of Esav. And Yitzchak is 60 years old when he becomes a father. Now, there's a very interesting Rashi. Let's read the Rashi. Shamaiti Medrash Agada. Says Rashi, I heard a Medrash, Hadarsha, which interprets it Lefi Pshuta according to the simple Pshat in the Pasuk. Badin Haya Oiches Bay. In other words, according to law, according to halacha, that Yaakov was grasping onto Esav. According to the strict halacha, he was saying to him, "Listen, you're not the bechor." What does that mean? Because to stop him from emerging from the womb first. Because Yaakov neitzah mitipa rishona. Because Yaakov was born from the very first drop from his father. The Esav min hashniya, and Esav from the second. Tzeo lamad, go and learn. You can prove this mishferferes, from a tube. Shepia katzara, whose opening is very narrow. Ten boshtei avonim. If you put two stones in a very thin tube, zu achazu, one after the other, hanichneses rishona, the one that goes in first, teitze achrona, will come out second, will come out last. Vanichneses achrona, the one that goes in last, teitze rishona, will come out first. Nimtza, so it comes out, it turns out, Esav hanoitza b'achrona, Esav, who was formed afterwards, yotzo rishon. V'Yaakov shenoitza rishona, and Yaakov was formed first, he went into the tube first, yotza achron, he emerged afterwards. Therefore, v'Yaakov bo la'akvei, so Yaakov came to prevent Esav from leaving the womb first, sheyehei rishon leida, Karishon Liyatzira, that just like he was the Rishon Liyatzira, he was the first to be formed, well, so too he should also be the first to sort of be born. V'yifta es Rachman, he would basically issue first from Rivka's womb. V'yitla es ha'bechorah min adin. Okay, that's the famous Rashi. Now, what's interesting, in next week's Parsha, the Pasuk says, when we fast forward some years, we're familiar with the story, Yaakov wants to get married, and he sees Rachel and Leah, and he intends to marry Rachel, and Lavan switches it, that in fact it's Leah underneath the veil, and it's not Rachel. Says the Pasuk, Vahiba Boikev in Leah, and the next morning, it's actually not Rachel, it's Leah, Vayomer Lavan, and so therefore Yaakov says to Lavan, Ma zoi sosiso li, halo berachel, avadati imach, velomer misani. You cheated me. We had a deal. I was working for Rachel. That was the deal. Why did you switch your daughters in the last? Says Lavan, Vayomer Lavan, lo yasem im kamenu loses hatzir lifnei bechira. That's not the way we do things. We don't give the younger one before the bechira. That was Lavan's reply. Now, so this is going to be the topic of the halacha shir for next week, please God. But what's interesting, according to halacha, many people bring this, that this is considered a recognized halacha, that one should try and marry children off in age order. That's the preference. And it's brought, and he quotes the Tcheles Mordechai, who's Rav Shalom Shvadron's grandfather. His name is also Mordechai Shalom Shvadron, the Maggid of Yerushalayim's grandfather. He says there in the next box, in paragraph 2b, Yesh lahavin, the B'teisus v'kiddushin v'shach paskinan. Okay, we paskin according to what Lavan says, that lo yasim kamenu lo seis hatzir lifnei bechira. V'halo Yaakov rotz lises Rachel. The question, of course, on that is, well, it didn't seem to bother Yaakov. He was very happy to marry Rachel first, and she was the younger one. So why is it that Chazal, a choshesh for the shitta of Lavan, of lo yasim kamenu lo seis hatzir lifnei bechira, when Yaakov Avinu wasn't obviously bothered by it, because he was wanting and willing to marry Rachel first. V'halo Yaakov rotz lises Rachel hatzir lifnei bechira. So that's the kasha, the Tcheles Mordechai. And there are proofs, like I said, and we'll discuss that Mishram Nahaloch next week. Can you marry younger children before the older sibling? That's a very interesting area. We'll talk about it in more detail next week, Mitzvah Hashem. But that's the question. The question is, if according to many poskim, that seems to be an appropriate course of action, why are we following the shitta of Lavan over the shitta of Yaakov Avinu? So if you turn to the next page, look at the second box. V'nir lefi ma shekosov hachidah. So he's got a very creative answer. He quotes the Chidah in Nachal Kedumim, Parsha Zu, b'shem Rabbeinu Ephraim. The Rachel v'Leah hayu tu'umos. He says that in next week's Parsha, Rachel and Leah are actually twins. Ela shel Leah nolda lifnei Rachel. It's just that Leah was born she was the older of the twins. V'hinei b'Rashi Parshas Toldos, our Rashi, which we just learned, Kosov, Tahakaidim b'leida b'tumim. When you've got twins, the one who actually emerges first, who is born first, who achron b'yitzira, was actually the later one, the second one in creation. Or Misha noilad achron hu rishon yitzira, and the one who actually emerges last was actually the first to be created. Moshel l'shvaferes ayin shom. That's the story, the moshel of the tube that Rashi brings. V'Yaakov choshev atzma lebechor neged Esov, like we just saw, that Yaakov reckoned himself as a bechor relative to Esov, mipnei shehu bechor liyitzira. He said, I was from the first drop, and therefore I am the bechor in creation. According to Yaakov, he assumed the same thing, not just about himself, but about Rachel as well. That just like he was the first in Yetzirah, therefore that he was the real Bechor, and so to Rachel. And therefore he wanted to marry her because she was the eldest. Lavan didn't realize that. He just thought that Lavan thought that Leah was the eldest because she was born the first. In Cain, Yaakov hiskim So you want to know why? What was our kasha? How can we paskin like Lavan over Yaakov? No, Yaakov agrees. Yaakov agrees that the preference is, of course, to marry the older child and then the younger child. And Yaakov was agreeing to Lavan. You're right. They just disagreed as to who the older child was. That Yaakov himself thought, just like I am the actual Bechor, because I'm the Bechor Yetzirah, well, so too Rachel is the Bechorah, and therefore I should marry her first. And in fact, therefore Yaakov is agreeing to Lavan in terms of policy. The only machlekes is who actually is the oldest. Okay, very, very interesting and very creative answer of the Chidah. Okay, let's move on. The Parsha then carries on and says that just like the Yaakov Avinu got married, the Yitzchak got married at 40 years old, so Esav wanted to do the same. So if you look at the next box in paragraph 3, says the pasuk, Vayihi Esav ben Arboim Shana, Esav was 40 years old, Vayikach Isha es Yehudis bas Be'eri Hachiti ves Bosmas bas Elon Hachiti. And Esav also gets married. He marries these two ladies, Yehudis bas Be'eri and Bosmas bas Elon. V'atien meiras ruach liyitzchok ulerivka. But it was a source of agitation, of provocation, of upset to Yitzchak and to Rivka. Says Rashi, gives a bit of background. Ben Arboim Shana. Esav, says Rashi, hoya nimshel lechazir. The Esav was compared to a chazir. The pasuk says, Yachsemena chazir miyar. HaChazir hazeh kashel sheichev, because when a pig, when a swine, when a chazir lies down, poishet telofov, it stretches out its hooves. Loima ru'ushani tar. Take a look, see that I'm tar. My hooves are split. Kach elu goizlim v'chaimsim, they rob and they take forcibly. Or marim atzum kasherim, the descendants of Esav, they pretend that they're displaying themselves, that they're kasherim, that they're good and honorable and decent, but obviously they're not. Because just like the first 40 years of his life, Esav would snatch women away from their husbands, and they would violate them. And when he became 40 years old, Omar Abba ben Aboim Shana Noses Isha, my father Yitzchak also got married when he was 40. So Afani Kain, I'll do the same thing. That's what Rashi says. Now, then the pasuk carries on and says, "Vatiena meras ruach liyitzchak ulerivka." Says Rashi, "Shehoyu." What does Rashi say? "Shehoyu ha'ovdos avodah zara," because these ladies were idol worshippers. The two wives of Esav were idol worshippers. Now, the Medrash says something very interesting on the pasuk. Vatiena meras ruach liyitzchak ulerivka, that it was a source of agitation, of frustration, of pain to Yitzchak and to Rivka, that these ladies were not really to their taste, they were idol worshippers. It says Yitzchak before Rivka. So says the Medrash, it's not a coincidence. Says the Medrash in the next box, in paragraph 3a, Lama Yitzchak Tzechila, Why was Yitzchak mentioned first? Ella, al yedei shoysa Rivka bas koimrim, because Rivka was the daughter of people who worshipped idols, lo hoysa makbedes b'tinoifis avodah zarah. She was less concerned about the disgust of avodah zarah. V'zeh al yedei shoy ben kadoshim, but Yitzchak, on the other hand, since he was the son of Kadoshim, of Avram and Sarah, he was more sensitive, more agitated by the choice of wife of their son Esau. And therefore the pasuk says, Yitzchak first and then to Rivka, because he was more sensitive to it, but Rivka had been desensitized because of the home in which she grew up. Her parents and her home was a home of idol worship. Altkan, that's the medrash on this pasuk. Now, time for some maths. How long ago did Rivka was she exposed to that avodah zarah? So it's fascinating when you think about it. So how old was she when she became a mother? Rivka, according to Rashi's Shita, which he quotes at the beginning of the Parsha, Yitzchak was 40 years old when he got married. Why was that? Because he was 37 at the Akedah. That's when Sarah died. And she was 127 when she died. She was 90 when she gave birth to Yitzchak. So we know that Yitzchak was 37 at the time of the Akedah, but she died just after the Akedah when hearing the news. That's when Avram was told that Rivka was born, and he waited 3 years until she was Roy Labia, until she was able to live together. So therefore, he was 40 when he got married, and Rivka was 3 years old, according to Rashi. I know there are other opinions, but that's the way Rashi learns. We're just told that Yitzchak was 60 when he became a father. Why? Because for 10 years he waited for Rivka to be Roy Labia, to be able to carry a child, and then she was barren for 10 years. So therefore it's 20 years in total. So she was 23 from the age of 3 when she got married. She was 23 when she became a mother. Then what? She gave a mother to Esau, who got married when he was 40. So how old was Rivka at her son's chasna, at Esau's chasna? She was 63. 40 plus 23. So she had left home 60 years ago as a 3-year-old. And yet, says the Pasuk, says the Medrash, that she was more desensitized to the exposure to Avodah Zarah because she had seen it from home. 60 years ago, when she was a 3-year-old girl. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. So what do you see from that? You see, I think, a very powerful insight. What you were exposed to from your very early years, it makes a mark. And even though Rivka lived in the home of, no doubt, very lofty Kedusha with a husband like Yitzchak for 40 years in the interim, for 60 years. She was married for 60 years, from the age of 3 till 63. She was married to Yitzchak in a home of sublime Kedusha, and yet she was a little bit more desensitized to it. You see the power of exposure to less positive influences. Just to finish with a very interesting sushtel with what Rabbi Shmuel once used to say, that he would quote the pasuk in Parsha Shoftim. The pasuk says, "Yad ha'edim tiyeh b'rishon la'misay," that if a person is liable to a capital punishment in Beis Din, who's the executioner? So the pasuk says, "Yad ha'edim tiyeh b'rishon." The edim themselves have got to carry out the misa. The witnesses themselves who testified and caused the culpability of this fellow, they're going to actually have to be the executioners. The Rambam gives a simple explanation, because Lote Shmir Gedola Miriya, they actually saw it. The Dayanim only heard it. So therefore, if you saw it, you're a better proof, if you like. Lote Shmir Gedola Miriya. But Rashmal says, he says that when a person is exposed to something negative, for example, a person was Machal Shams, or a person committed a murder, and you witnessed that, you saw it, it leaves a very damaging impression on you. So therefore, to counter that negative impact that it's had on you, the aide who saw it, have got to undo that negative effect, and you've got to be the one to carry out the Misa. And that's why Dafka Yad Ha'edin Tiyeh B'Rishona. He quotes the story, I may have said it before, I forget, that he heard this, I think, from the Manchester Rosh Yeshiva. The story goes, there was a middle-aged lady, Rahman Islam, she was having a brain surgery. And in the middle of the operation, she started singing an aria from an opera in the original Italian. Okay, you hear funny stories about surgery, that's what apparently happened. So post-operation, the surgeon was sitting down with her, talking to her, and said, by the way, something very strange happened in the middle of surgery. You were singing an aria from an opera in the original Italian. I didn't know you like opera. I also like opera. She said, I don't like opera. I don't know what you're talking about. So he said, well, this is what happened. You did it. And she thought back and she remembered when she was 10 years old, over 4 decades earlier, her parents dragged her to some opera, not willingly, and she sat there never watching the whole thing, and every single word had been absorbed. So you see that we've got the capacity to absorb a huge amount. Goldwicht used to say that there was once it was a cartoon, but I think he used to say that when you see a Chilul Shabbos and you scream Shabbos Shabbos, it's for you, it's not for them. It's to counter the negative impact that for you have witnessed Chilul Shabbos. There was a cartoon I once saw of a chassid standing there screaming Shabbos Shabbos at a plane going past. Right? But that's the thought. They're not going to hear you, but it's not for them, it's for you. It's to counter the negative impression that you've seen because you've witnessed Chilul Shabbos. So therefore, that's really the powerful impressions is very much borne out in the Parsha. And I think Rabbi Hartman is the one who alerted me to that point, that she saw something in the first few years of her life, but 6 decades later, she was still, to some degree, we're talking about Rivka Imenu, was somewhat desensitized to that exposure. Okay, so there we have it. So 3 ideas on this evening's Parsha Shir. Number 1, davening for somebody else. Why did he daven specifically in front of her? Because he didn't want to mention the name of the mother. Of the father, of Besuel, because Besuel was a Rasha, and therefore he dafka davens in a presence, because if you daven in someone's presence, then it's kel norafon Allah, you can actually just daven for the person without saying their name. Who is older, so that's very geshmak, that according to this Rashi, this famous Rashi with the tube, Yaakov Avinu felt that he was actually the Bechor. So that answers the question, says it's Chedes Mordechai, regarding whether a younger sibling can get married before the older sibling. Why do we pass on like Lovan over Yaakov? Teretz says Yaakov agreed. I agree with this principle in concept. However, I just disagree with you as to who the Bechor is. I'm the Bechor, and so is Rachel, because she was Bechor Yitzira, and therefore that's considered the real Bechora in his eyes. And then, third of all, this powerful impression that Rivka sees something 60 plus years earlier, and yet it still makes a Roshim. That's why the Medrash says that Vatina Meras Ruach Yitzchak Rivka Dafka le Yitzchak Techila. Okay, we'll leave it there.